There is a moment most people recognize immediately. You started something, a new habit, a creative project, a language, a fitness routine, maybe a business. You began with real energy, not the performative kind, not the "this is my year" kind. You genuinely wanted it. You worked at it. And for a while, it was working. And then something shifted. The energy didn't leave dramatically. It didn't walk out the door with a suitcase. It just quietly stopped showing up. And one day you looked at what you had started and felt nothing but mild guilt. The kind that doesn't move you, only weighs you. And you called it by its name. You gave up. But here is the question most people never ask. They ask, why couldn't I push through? They ask, what is wrong with me? But almost no one asks the more important question. What were you running on in the first place? Because not all motivation is the same. And the kind of fuel you are using will determine exactly how far you can go and what happens when the tank runs out. Welcome to Lumina Slow English. I am speaking slowly and clearly so you can follow every word. This is real psychology. This is real English. Let's begin. Let's go back to 1973. A psychologist named Mark Lepper was working with children at a preschool in California. These were children who already loved to draw. They drew freely, happily, without any encouragement. Drawing was simply something they did because they wanted to. Lepper divided them into 3 groups. The first group was told they would receive a reward, a pretty certificate, for drawing. The second group also received the certificate, but as a surprise after drawing, without being told in advance. The third group received nothing. After 2 weeks, Lepper brought back the drawing materials and quietly observed what happened. The children who had been promised the reward, the ones who had drawn in order to get the certificate, were now spending significantly less time drawing. Their interest had dropped. Their spontaneous engagement had declined. The reward had not increased their love of drawing. It had replaced it. Lepper called this the over-justification effect. When you add an external reason to do something you already do for internal reasons, the brain rewires its explanation for why you are doing it. It stops saying, I do this because I love it. It starts saying, I do this because of the reward. And when the reward disappears, or loses its power, so does the behavior. This one study explains more about why people give up than almost anything else in psychology. Think about how many times motivation has been sold to you. The right playlist, the right app, the streak tracker, the accountability partner, the challenge, the before and after, the points, the leaderboard. All of these are external structures. Some are useful, but none of them are sustainable if there is nothing underneath. Think about the person who starts journaling because they read that successful people journal. They buy the perfect notebook. They write every morning for 3 weeks. And then they miss one day and the streak breaks and something quietly ends. It was never really about the journaling. It was about the identity they were borrowing from someone else. Think about the person who runs a 5K because their company organized a charity event. They trained for 2 months. They crossed the finish line proud. And then, no next race, no continuation. The event was the motivation. The event is over, and so is the running. Now, think about the child Lepper observed before the experiment, the one who drew simply because the drawing was there and the pencil was in their hand. That child did not need a certificate. The drawing was its own certificate. Vocabulary pause. Let's stop here for a moment and name 3 words you have been absorbing in context. The first word is intrinsic. Intrinsic means coming from inside. Intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from within you, from genuine interest, from curiosity, from meaning. It is the drawing the children did before the experiment began. When something is intrinsic, it does not need an external reason to justify it. The act itself is the reason. The second word is extrinsic. Extrinsic means coming from outside. Extrinsic motivation is driven by external factors, certificates, money, approval, fear of judgment, public comparison. It is the drawing done to earn the reward. Extrinsic motivation is not bad, but it is borrowed, and borrowed fuel runs out. The third word is sustainable. Sustainable means able to continue for a long time without collapsing. A sustainable habit is one that continues not because external pressure forces it, but because it is connected to something real inside you. Sustainability is not about discipline. It is about roots. Intrinsic, extrinsic, sustainable. Hold these three words. They are the architecture of everything that follows. In the 1980s, two psychologists at the University of Rochester began asking a question that seemed almost too simple. What makes people stay? Not perform better. Not work harder. Just stay. Continue. Come back tomorrow. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan called their answer self-determination theory. Their research, conducted over decades across dozens of countries and cultures, found that sustainable motivation, the kind that doesn't collapse when things get hard, depends on three specific psychological needs being met. The first need is autonomy. Autonomy means feeling that you are choosing what you do, not because someone told you to, not because you will be punished if you don't, but because you decided. This is not the same as doing whatever you want whenever you want. It means that even when you do something difficult or uncomfortable, you feel like it is your choice. That distinction matters enormously. The person who goes to the gym because they genuinely want to feel stronger experiences their effort differently from the person who goes because they are afraid of how they look. The external behavior is identical. The internal experience is completely different. And the second person quits first. The second need is competence. Competence means feeling that you are growing, that effort leads somewhere, that the work you put in is building something real inside you. Not that you are already an expert, but that you are becoming one, slowly, visibly. When people feel completely lost, when every attempt feels random, when progress is invisible, when they cannot tell if they are getting better, they stop. Not because they are weak, because the brain interprets stagnation as a signal to redirect resources. If effort is producing nothing, the intelligent response is to stop. And so the brain stops. The third need is relatedness. Relatedness means feeling connected to other people, to a community, to something larger than the task itself. We are deeply social animals. We persist far longer when we feel that what we are doing is witnessed, valued, or shared. The writer who publishes even to a small audience, the runner who trains with a friend, the student who belongs to a study group. These are not distractions from the work. They are fuel for the work. Autonomy, competence, relatedness. When these three needs are met, motivation becomes self-renewing. It does not need constant reloading from outside. Now let me tell you about two people. I will call them Thomas and Elena. Thomas joins a gym in January. His motivation is clear. He wants to look better before a trip in April. He follows a plan. He goes consistently. He is disciplined. By March, progress has slowed. The trip is still coming, but the work feels mechanical. He is not curious about training. He is executing a plan toward a deadline. When April arrives and he leaves for his trip, he does not go back to the gym in May. Thomas had extrinsic motivation. It worked until its purpose was fulfilled. Then it vanished, exactly as extrinsic motivation always does. Elena starts running at the same time. She starts because she had a difficult few months and found that running outside is one of the only moments in her day where her thoughts settle. She doesn't track her pace. She doesn't have a target weight. She sometimes texts a friend after a run just to say she went. In March, she gets sick and misses 2 weeks. When she recovers, she goes back, not because of a deadline, not because of a plan, but because she missed the quiet. Elena had intrinsic motivation connected to all 3 elements of self-determination theory. She chose it freely, autonomy. She felt herself growing in ways that mattered to her, competence. And it was connected to something relational, even if only through a small text, relatedness. The 3 roots held. And so did she. Vocabulary pause. 3 more words from what you have just heard. The first, autonomy. Autonomy is the feeling of choosing your own actions freely, from inside yourself rather than because of external pressure. In psychology, autonomy is one of the deepest human needs, not just the freedom to do what you want, but the felt sense that your actions originate from you. When autonomy is absent, when you feel controlled, observed, judged, or trapped, the activity stops feeling like yours. The second, competence. Competence is the experience of being capable and growing, not being perfect, growing. In self-determination theory, competence is the need to feel effective, to see that effort produces results. When competence is missing, when you cannot detect any improvement, when feedback is absent or consistently negative, the brain reads this as a signal. Stop trying here. The third, relatedness. Relatedness is the feeling of being genuinely connected to people, to community, to meaning beyond yourself. It is not the same as being watched or evaluated. It is the quiet sense of mattering to someone, of doing something alongside others even when you are physically alone. Relatedness is often invisible until it is gone. And then suddenly the thing you were doing alone becomes much harder to continue. Autonomy, competence, relatedness. Now let's go deeper. Ork, mest, mos marmar 4. But there is a third reason people give up, and it is quieter and more dangerous than either of the first 2. Martin Seligman discovered it in 1967, though he did not plan to. He was studying conditioning in dogs when he noticed something that deeply troubled him. Dogs that had been exposed to electric shocks they could not escape, even after the shocks became completely escapable, would not move. They lay down. They stopped trying. They had learned that effort changed nothing, and so effort stopped. Seligman called this learned helplessness, and in the decades that followed, he found that humans learn it too, not through electric shocks, but through repeated experiences of trying and failing in ways that feel random, unpredictable, and completely outside their control. The crucial word is learned. Helplessness is not a character trait you were born with. It is a conclusion. A conclusion the brain draws from accumulated evidence. My actions do not affect outcomes. Once the brain believes this, it conserves energy the only way it knows how. It stops initiating. It stops hoping. It waits. And the external world rarely questions this. People who have stopped trying are often described as unmotivated, passive, or lacking willpower. Very few people look at someone who has given up and ask, what did they try before that didn't work? How many times did they reach and get nothing? What did experience actually teach them? Because learned helplessness is invisible. It doesn't look like a wound. It looks like a personality. Here is what makes this especially important. You may have learned helplessness in one specific area, creative work, romantic relationships, professional ambition, physical health, without it touching other areas at all. A person can be highly effective in their career and completely shut down about making new friends. Someone can be resilient physically and deeply hopeless about learning something new. Learned helplessness is not global. It is local. It was taught by specific experiences in a specific domain, which means it can be unlearned. Seligman spent the rest of his career studying exactly that, not just how helplessness forms, but the conditions under which people recover. He found that what breaks the pattern is not motivation. It is not inspiration. It is not someone telling you that you can do it. What breaks the pattern is one small, controlled experience of agency. One moment where action produces a predictable result. One tiny instance where I tried and it worked are connected. Not a transformation, not a rebirth, a crack in the wall. And through that crack, everything eventually grows. And now I want to talk about something that most conversations about giving up completely miss. There is a moment, and most people who have abandoned something important know this moment, when giving up stops being an action and becomes an identity. It begins with a behavior, I stopped running. And then, slowly, it becomes a belief. I am someone who cannot stick to exercise. And from that belief, a story, I have always been like this. I am just not that kind of person. And from that story, a self-concept that quietly protects itself from being challenged. Because once giving up is who you are, trying again becomes genuinely threatening. To try again is to risk confirming the story. To try and fail again would mean the story is true. And so not trying becomes a form of self-protection. It is not laziness. It is self-defense. The brain is protecting you from an experience it expects to hurt. This is one of the most important implications of self-determination theory. The problem is often not motivation. The problem is identity, what you believe about yourself in relation to this particular thing. A person who believes, I am a runner who took a long break will behave very differently from a person who believes, I am someone who cannot run. The first person comes back. The second person has already decided. Not consciously, they would probably say they want to run. But the identity has already answered the question of whether they will. James Clear, in his writing on behavior change, captures this with a simple observation. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to become. Not every vote succeeds. Not every attempt produces visible results. But the accumulation of attempts, of small, consistent choices, slowly rewrites the story you tell yourself about who you are. You do not need to become someone different before you start. You need to start in order to slowly become different. Now I want to tell you about Vincent van Gogh. Most people know the story at the surface level. The tortured artist, the difficult life, the paintings no one wanted during his lifetime. But the part that matters for this conversation is less dramatic and more instructive. Van Gogh did not begin as a painter. He tried to be a preacher. He tried to work as an art dealer. He tried to be a teacher. He failed at all of these, not gently, but completely. He was dismissed, rejected, and described by people who knew him as too intense, too difficult, too much. He began painting seriously at 27. He had almost no formal training. His early work was dark, technically awkward, far from the luminous canvases we know. He knew this. He wrote about it in his letters with aching honesty. But he also wrote something else. He wrote that painting was the first thing in his life that felt like it truly belonged to him. Not because he was skilled, he wasn't, not yet. but because the doing of it was its own reason. The outcome did not determine the value of the act. He was not painting to sell. He was not painting to be recognized. He was painting because not painting felt like a kind of dying. He completed over 2,000 works in roughly 10 years. He sold one painting during his lifetime. The external world gave him almost nothing, and yet he continued, not because of discipline, not because of a system, not because the reward structure kept him going, but because the motivation was intrinsic in the deepest possible sense. It was not about what painting would get him. It was about what painting was. And vocabulary pause. 3 final words to carry with you. The first, internalization. Internalization is the process by which something external gradually becomes genuinely yours. You do not begin by loving every difficult thing you do, but over time, if the conditions are right, external pressure can give way to genuine care. The student who first studies only for grades can, under the right conditions, eventually study because they love the subject. That transformation is not automatic. It requires autonomy, competence, and relatedness working together. Internalization is the destination of well-built motivation. The second, agency. Agency is the felt sense that your actions matter, that what you do has consequences in the world. It is the opposite of helplessness. A person with agency does not expect the world to always cooperate, but they believe their effort is not wasted. Agency is not optimism. It is not confidence. It is the working assumption that action and outcome are connected, and that assumption, once lost, can be rebuilt, one small reliable experience at a time. The third, rekindle. To rekindle is to make a fire burn again, one that had gone out, not to start a new fire from scratch, to return to something real that was interrupted. Most people who have given up do not need a brand new beginning. They need to find the embers still warm beneath the ash and breathe on them carefully, with patience, with the knowledge they didn't have before. Internalization, agency, rekindle. Ian. So what does all of this mean for your own life? If you have given up on something, or if you are in the process of giving up right now, here is what the research suggests you examine, honestly and without cruelty toward yourself. The first question, what was powering it? Was your motivation connected to something internal, curiosity, meaning, identity, genuine growth, or was it primarily external, a deadline, a comparison, a reward that has since lost its power? External motivation is real. It works, but it has a shelf life. If what you were running on was external, the fuel did not fail you. It simply ran out. That is what it does. The second question, were your 3 basic needs being met? Did the activity give you a sense of genuine choice, or did it feel like obligation? Did you feel yourself growing, or did progress feel invisible and random? Did the work connect you to anything beyond the task itself, or were you doing it entirely alone, without witness or community? If autonomy, competence, or relatedness were absent, the problem was not your character. The problem was the environment, and environments can be changed. The third question, what did experience teach you in this domain? If you carry learned helplessness here, the solution is not more inspiration. It is one small, reliable, controlled experience of agency. Something so small it cannot realistically fail. 1 paragraph written. A 5-minute walk. 1 honest sentence spoken. Not to prove you have changed, just to insert 1 new data point. Action and outcome can be connected. The wall has a crack. The fourth and most important question, who are you in relation to this thing? Are you someone who gave up, or someone who was running on the wrong fuel? Are you someone who cannot commit, or someone whose autonomy was absent and whose needs went unmet? Are you someone who failed, or someone who learned something real about what does not work, and who now knows something that could change everything? You do not have to believe the new story yet. You just have to stop reinforcing the old one. One sentence at a time. One choice. One small act of agency, repeated until the story quietly changes. Art. There is something important to understand about what returning actually looks like when you use these questions honestly. It does not begin with motivation. It rarely begins with energy or enthusiasm. It begins with something much quieter, a small, deliberate choice to act in the direction of a story you want to be true. You do not wait to feel ready. You do not wait for inspiration to arrive. You choose a version of the thing so small that failure becomes unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. And you let that small version count. The person who gave up on writing does not sit down to write for 2 hours. They open the document. They write one sentence. They close it. And they say to themselves, I wrote today. That is the vote. That is the data point. That is the crack in the wall. The person who stopped running does not sign up for a race. They put on their shoes and walk to the end of the street and back. They say, I moved today. That is the rekindle. Not the full flame, the first small breath that makes something glow again. This feels embarrassingly small. It feels like it cannot possibly matter. But the research is consistent. The size of the action matters far less than the presence of the connection. Action, consequence, connected. That is the loop the brain needs to relearn. Once it learns that loop again, it begins to build. Once it remembers that effort is not wasted here, it begins to invest. Small is not a compromise. Small is the strategy. Apa and walk. Most conversations about giving up are shame conversations. They frame quitting as weakness, as moral failure, as evidence of something fundamentally wrong with you. And that framing is not only scientifically inaccurate, it is actively harmful. Because shame does not motivate. Research on this has been consistent for decades. Shame makes people smaller, more defended, less willing to attempt anything that carries risk. Shame is the emotion that says, the problem is you. And when the problem is you, the solution is to hide, not to try again. What the research actually says is this: you are a human being with 3 deep psychological needs, operating in environments that often do not meet them, sometimes carrying conclusions drawn from experiences genuinely beyond your control. You gave up because the fuel ran out, or the conditions were wrong, or because experience taught you a lesson that felt completely true at the time. That is not a character flaw. That is a human response to human circumstances. And it is something you can change, not through willpower, not through systems or streaks, but through understanding what your motivation is made of and building something that does not depend on conditions staying perfect forever. You are allowed to return to what you abandoned. You are allowed to begin again without pretending the absence never happened. You are allowed to re-enter something gently, carrying the knowledge you have now, without the expectation that this time you must not fail. Returning with awareness is not starting over. It is starting deeper, from real understanding instead of pure hope. The embers are still there, beneath the ash. Rekindle. Before you go, I have one question, and I want you to answer it in English in the comments below. Think of something you gave up on, message something real, something that mattered, and answer this. What was one thing that, looking back, you were missing when you stopped? Not what went wrong, Not what you should have done differently. Just what was missing? Autonomy, the feeling it was truly your choice. Competence, the sense that effort was going somewhere real. Relatedness, someone who saw you trying. Or something else entirely, something only you know the name of. One sentence. In English. That is all. I will read them. This was Lumina Slow English. I am glad you were here today, and I will see you in the next one. Returning with awareness is not starting over. It is starting deeper, from real understanding instead of pure hope. The embers are still there, beneath the ash. Rekindle. Before you go, I have one question, and I want you to answer it in English in the comments below. Think of something you gave up on, message something real, something that mattered, and answer this. What was one thing that, looking back, you were missing when you stopped? Not what went wrong, not what you should have done differently, just what was missing? Autonomy, the feeling it was truly your choice. Competence, the sense that effort was going somewhere real. Relatedness, someone who saw you trying. Or something else entirely, something only you know the name of. One sentence. In English. That is all. I will read them. This was Lumina Slow English. I am glad you were here today, and I will see you in the next one.